What if a simple act of racism leads to a life-changing revelation? Picture this: a poor black man, quietly walking home after a long day of work, is stopped by a cop and wrongfully accused of loitering. The officer, seemingly convinced of his own superiority, demands to see identification and begins to escalate the situation. But little does he know, the man he's about to arrest is connected to someone much more powerful than he could ever imagine. What happens when the officer realizes the man's wife is a prominent figure in the community? The twist will leave you speechless. It's a hot afternoon in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. The sun beats down on the small, tight-knit streets where people are out and about, some enjoying the afternoon, others finishing up their errands. The peacefulness of the neighborhood stands in stark contrast to the tension about to unfold. David, a black man in his early 30s, walks home after a long day at work. He's a hard-working father, doing everything he can to support his family. His hands are worn from hours of physical labor. He works multiple jobs just to make ends meet with no complaints. The sweat on his brow is evidence of his tireless work ethic, a man whose pride lies in providing for his loved ones. As he approaches his block, thinking about his wife and kids waiting for him at home, the sound of screeching tires catches his attention. He turns around, only to find a white police officer pulling up beside him. Officer Davis, known around the neighborhood for his aggressive demeanor, steps out of his squad car without saying a word. He eyes David with an unspoken judgment, already assuming the worst based on nothing but his skin color. David stops in his tracks, his heart rate quickening. He's no stranger to being racially profiled. This happens to him regularly, and the burden of such unjust treatment weighs heavily on him. He looks the officer in the eye, keeping his posture calm and his demeanor respectful. "Is there a problem, officer?" David asks, trying to keep his tone even. Officer Davis, however, doesn't respond with the courtesy David offers. Instead, his voice turns harsh as he accuses David of loitering, demanding to see his identification. "You don't belong around here," the officer sneers. David, a bit taken aback but still maintaining his composure, reaches for his wallet to provide the officer with his ID, but the officer interrupts him, stepping forward and grabbing David's arm. "I said don't move," he orders, his words carrying an edge of hostility. David is stunned by the officer's aggression. He's done nothing wrong, and yet here he stands, facing a potential arrest. His mind races. He's aware that this could escalate quickly, that any wrong move could land him in serious trouble. The officer's actions make no sense to him, and he can feel the injustice of it all. He tries to explain himself calmly, to tell the officer he's just a man walking home from a hard day's work, but Officer Davis isn't interested in listening. "Let's see some identification now," the officer demands again, raising his voice. His hand tightens on David's arm, and the tension is palpable. The other residents of the neighborhood begin to take notice. Some stop and stare, others shake their heads, knowing all too well the type of encounter David is having. Yet, despite the heat of the moment, David doesn't lose his cool. He stands tall, shoulders squared, refusing to let the officer's treatment break him. As the standoff continues, the reality of the situation begins to set in. This officer, who's supposed to be upholding the law and serving the community, is using his power in an unjust way. David knows he has no choice but to comply, even as he feels the sting of being treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood. His mind drifts to his wife, the woman who's been his partner through every challenge life has thrown their way. He imagines how hard she's worked to get to where they are, how far they've come together, and how much is at stake. What's going on now, he knows, could change everything. The escalating tension is palpable, but David doesn't let his fear show. Instead, he stands firm, taking the officer's treatment with a level of calmness that belies the anger boiling beneath the surface. This is the moment he faces every day as a black man in America: the constant fear, the profiling, the unfairness. But little does Officer Davis know, this is the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could ever predict. Something that will flip their world upside down. David, a 32-year-old black man, has always worked hard to provide for his family. Growing up in a lower-class neighborhood, his life has been a constant battle against the systemic racism and prejudice that permeates society. David doesn't have the luxury of luxury jobs or high-paying opportunities. Instead, he spends his days juggling a variety of low-wage jobs, all in an attempt to make ends meet. Despite the exhausting routine and daily struggles, David maintains a quiet determination to keep pushing forward. From dawn until dusk, David works tirelessly, sacrificing time with his wife, Sophia, and their children, just to ensure that they have food on the table and a roof over their heads. Although the struggle is real, David never complains. His integrity is evident to those who know him, and he takes immense pride in providing for his family, even if society often overlooks him. Throughout his life, David has faced the sting of racial prejudice. His interactions with authorities and strangers have been tinged with suspicion and disrespect. Yet, through all the microaggressions and biased assumptions, David keeps a calm, composed demeanor. He knows how to navigate these encounters, doing his best to stay out of trouble and avoid attracting negative attention. But it's hard to avoid when time and again the color of his skin becomes an obstacle that he's forced to confront daily. What makes David's story even more complex is his wife, Sophia. Unlike David, who prefers to stay out of the spotlight, Sophia has built a career fighting for the rights of marginalized communities. As an attorney specializing in racial justice and equality, she has become a respected voice in her field. Her advocacy for equal rights has made her a prominent figure, with her work often featured in the media, challenging the very biases that David silently faces every day. But while Sophia's career flourishes, David remains in the background, deliberately distancing himself from the limelight. He understands the risks that come with being in the public eye, especially as a black man. His own life is grounded in avoiding conflict, even when injustice stares him in the face. While Sophia's work is her calling, David's role as a father and husband is his priority. He believes in staying under the radar to avoid attracting unnecessary attention. And that's exactly what he does. He keeps his head down, works hard, and takes care of his family. But the world sees him only for his skin color and the economic status he was born into, not for his character or work ethic. On the other side of the equation is Officer Davis, a 47-year-old white police officer who has been entrenched in his biases for years. He's worked in law enforcement for over 2 decades, and over the years, his personal prejudices have shaped the way he interacts with people, particularly those of color. Officer Davis believes that black people are inherently suspicious and dangerous, often using his position to target them unjustly. Known for his heavy-handed tactics, Officer Davis has a history of harassing black men, making assumptions about their character based solely on the color of their skin. He has faced criticism for his actions, but the system has allowed him to continue without any real consequences. He's learned to operate with a sense of entitlement. believing that, as a police officer, he can do whatever he wants without fear of repercussions. However, despite his position and the implicit power he wields, Officer Davis has never had to face any serious consequences for his behavior. He's used to looking down on those he considers beneath him, and is so deeply entrenched in his views that he feels justified in his actions. To him, black people are an other that he feels entitled to control, intimidate, and judge. The collision of these two worlds, David's quiet, hard-working existence, and Officer Davis's deeply ingrained prejudices, would soon set the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. David, simply trying to make his way home from a long day of work, will find himself facing the judgment of a man who sees him as nothing more than a stereotype. And yet, what Officer Davis doesn't realize is that David's life is far more complex than the assumptions he's made. This moment would reveal more than just one man's struggle. It would reveal the power of hidden connections and the surprising truths that can change everything. As David continues his walk home, the sun beginning to dip behind the houses in his quiet suburban neighborhood, his thoughts are interrupted by the sudden screech of a police car pulling up beside him. Officer Davis, sitting in the driver's seat, rolls down the window and eyes David suspiciously. The officer immediately begins asking intrusive questions about where he's going and why he's in the area. His tone is accusatory, laced with suspicion. David, used to these kinds of interactions but always composed, explains that he's simply walking home from work. He lives nearby, just a few blocks away, and nothing about his presence in the neighborhood is unusual. But Officer Davis isn't listening. He immediately accuses David of acting suspiciously and insists that he step back so that he can check his ID. David, frustrated but still calm, tries to reason with the officer, explaining that he hasn't done anything wrong and that he's just trying to get home after a long day at work. But the officer's hostility continues to escalate. His voice gets louder, and he demands David's ID even though David has not committed any offense. Before David knows it, his rights are ignored, and Officer Davis grabs him roughly, slapping handcuffs on his wrists. Without a word of explanation, David is shoved into the back of the police car. Inside the car, David sits quietly, the weight of years of racial prejudice settling on his shoulders. He knows the drill. He knows that this will be another unjust moment he'll have to endure, another day of having his dignity stripped away simply because of the color of his skin. His frustration simmers, but he doesn't let it show. He remains still, his mind focused on what he has to do next, how to get out of this situation, and how to protect his family from the consequences of yet another wrongful encounter. Meanwhile, word of David's arrest spreads quickly through the neighborhood, and it isn't long before Sophia, his wife, hears about it. A neighbor who witnessed the incident called her, informing her that David had been detained by the police. Alarmed and concerned, Sophia immediately rushes to the scene, driving quickly to where she's been told David is being held. As she arrives, she steps out of her car, looking around for her husband. The scene is tense, with David sitting inside the police car, the officer standing beside it, seemingly unaware of the gravity of the situation. But as soon as Officer Davis sees Sophia, his demeanor shifts completely. He recognizes her instantly. This isn't just any woman walking up to the scene. It's Sophia Carter, a renowned civil rights attorney, who has made a name for herself by fighting against systemic injustice, often taking on the very police force that Officer Davis is a part of. Sophia, tall and confident, walks toward the scene with an air of authority. As soon as Officer Davis realizes who she is, panic strikes. His face goes pale, and he stammers slightly, the weight of his actions suddenly crashing down on him. He knows who she is and knows that arresting David, her husband, without cause will have serious consequences. The case could spiral out of control, and Officer Davis could lose everything. The officer tries to mask his nervousness, but the situation has already gotten away from him. David, still sitting in the back of the police car, can feel the shift in energy. His wife, the one person who could change the tide, has arrived. He can see the tension in the officer's face, and he knows that this will be more than just another wrongful arrest. This could be the moment that everything changes for him and for the system that has wronged him so many times. Sophia steps up to the officer and asks, with a calm yet firm voice, "What's going on here, Officer Davis?" "Why is my husband being detained?" The crowd begins to gather, watching the scene unfold. As the tension mounts, the officer stammers, unable to provide a coherent answer, his earlier arrogance giving way to fear. The shift in power is palpable, and it's clear that Officer Davis's confidence is now crumbling in front of everyone. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think David should have been treated differently? Share your thoughts with us. The situation continues to unfold, and the entire neighborhood stands witness to a confrontation that no one could have predicted, one that could change everything for both David and Officer Davis. Sophia approaches the police car with an air of authority that commands respect. Her eyes lock onto Officer Davis, who, until now, had been acting with complete confidence. However, as she steps closer, the officer's demeanor shifts. His arrogance falters, replaced by visible anxiety. He stammers as he tries to explain the situation, but his words come out in a disjointed mess. "Officer Davis, what is going on here?" Sophia's voice is calm, but it's clear she means business. The officer hesitates, still unsure of how to react. The tension in the air is thick, and it's apparent that the officer didn't expect the wife of the man he wrongfully arrested to be someone of Sophia's stature. As she approaches the car, the officer's body language betrays his nervousness. Sophia steps up to the car, her eyes unwavering. She reaches for the door of the squad car and opens it with quiet but firm determination. "Release my husband immediately," she orders. Officer Davis stutters, trying to justify his actions, but his excuses crumble. He can't form a coherent argument, and it's clear from the way he fumbles with his words that he knows he's in the wrong. His earlier confidence is gone. He tries to mumble something about suspicion and loitering, but none of it makes sense given the circumstances. Sophia doesn't let him off the hook. She holds his gaze and speaks with a calm authority. "You have no grounds to detain him. He's done nothing wrong. I'm asking you once more, release my husband." The officer stands there, his face red with embarrassment as the weight of the situation settles in. He offers a weak apology, but it's evident that his words mean little now. He's caught in a position he never expected, and he knows that the consequences of his actions are only beginning. Sophia stands her ground, and with a firm gesture, she helps David out of the squad car. She turns to face Officer Davis and, with a steady voice, makes it clear that his behavior will not be tolerated. "This is harassment. I will be filing a formal complaint and you will answer for this." Her words are calm, but they carry an undeniable force, and Officer Davis knows this is far from over. Taking out her phone, Sophia begins recording the scene, making sure there is a record of what happened. "I want everything documented," she says, her voice cool and measured, but there's no mistaking the power in her words. The officer looks down, unable to respond, as the neighborhood begins to take notice. People gather around, murmuring in disbelief, some recording the incident on their phones. Many in the neighborhood know Sophia's reputation, not only as a successful lawyer, but as a fierce advocate for justice. They also know David, quiet, dignified, and hard-working. They watch with growing respect as Sophia stands up for her husband, knowing that her voice, combined with her credentials, will have serious consequences for Officer Davis. The power in the moment shifts drastically. What started as a simple traffic stop has now turned into a confrontation that will define Officer Davis's career. He realizes that not only is his behavior under intense scrutiny, but he's also in danger of losing his job. The fear of public backlash and the weight of his unjust actions settle in as the crowd continues to watch, many knowing exactly what's at stake. Sophia stands tall, her posture firm, as she directs her words at the officer. This won't go unnoticed, I'll make sure of that. As the neighborhood begins to understand what just happened, the gravity of the situation becomes more apparent. Officer Davis, though still standing with his head down, knows that this is a moment he will never forget. The tension in the air is palpable as everyone watches how this power dynamic has shifted. What was once an unjust, prejudiced arrest is now a clear case of retaliation against the officer's abuse of authority, one that will have far-reaching consequences. Sophia's confidence and David's quiet strength have turned the tables, making sure the world knows that their voices won't be silenced. Officer Davis's actions will no longer be dismissed or overlooked. The community has witnessed something monumental, the kind of strength and justice that comes from standing up to prejudice and fighting for what is right. The incident quickly takes a life of its own. Following the public outcry and the widespread coverage of Officer Davis's actions, the police department is forced to take immediate action. The officer is suspended, pending a thorough investigation into his behavior. The news of his suspension spreads, signaling a victory for justice in the face of racism and misconduct. David and Sophia, now a symbol of resilience, stand together at the forefront of the movement for accountability. The police department, under mounting pressure from the community, issues a public apology to the couple, acknowledging the mistreatment David suffered and the mistakes made by Officer Davis. This apology is a rare acknowledgement of the issues faced by Black residents in their town, and it sets a precedent for future actions. As part of the fallout, the department is forced to implement comprehensive racial bias training for all officers. New policies are enacted that directly address the harassment of Black residents, providing guidelines for officers on how to handle interactions with the public respectfully and equitably. This marks the beginning of a much-needed shift in the department's culture, one that had previously tolerated such abuses of power without consequence. Officer Davis, once a fixture in his department, now faces a future filled with uncertainty. His career is in jeopardy, and the weight of his actions begins to sink in. The disciplinary action against him sends a strong message to the entire department, signaling that racism and abuse of power will not go unchallenged. The officer is under investigation, and the department is now exploring the possibility of his termination. Sophia and David, however, refuse to allow this incident to be seen as an isolated moment. They use the attention brought on by the incident to launch a community initiative aimed at educating residents about their rights and the importance of holding law enforcement accountable. The initiative focuses on teaching people how to report misconduct, how to defend their rights in potentially dangerous situations, and how to build a community where residents feel safe from harassment and prejudice. Working closely with local activists and politicians, the couple helps push for reform in police practices, ensuring that the community's concerns are heard and addressed. Together, they build a coalition of community leaders, citizens, and lawmakers to push for stronger protections and greater accountability in policing. This initiative focuses on addressing the systemic racism that continues to permeate many communities, fighting for policies that promote equity and justice for marginalized groups. The couple's work doesn't stop at activism. Sophia, a highly respected lawyer, uses her platform to call for greater transparency in policing, focusing specifically on the history of discriminatory practices that continue to disproportionately impact Black residents. David, driven by his personal experience, pushes for changes that prioritize safer neighborhoods and more inclusive opportunities for people of color. Their efforts gain traction quickly, as their story is not just about their individual victory over racism, but about creating a lasting, tangible change in the community. They work together to ensure that the lessons learned from their struggle ripple outwards, making a difference in the lives of others who continue to face systemic inequality. The impact of their initiative is felt across the community. Local businesses, schools, and community centers begin to adopt similar strategies for addressing racism, with many embracing diversity training, creating more inclusive spaces, and setting up programs designed to elevate Black voices. David and Sophia become key figures in this transformation, showing that standing up for justice can lead to real, positive change. As they look back on that fateful moment when David was wrongfully arrested, the couple realizes how far they've come. They've not only brought accountability to a broken system, but they've also inspired a generation of residents to fight for their rights, ensuring that the community they call home is one where every person is treated with respect and dignity. Their journey is just beginning, and the power of their efforts shows that when individuals stand together, they can spark a movement that transcends their personal experiences and creates a future where justice is a reality for everyone. The arrest incident becomes a pivotal moment for the entire community. What started as a harrowing and unjust experience for David soon turns into a catalyst for systemic change. With the intervention of local activists, community leaders, and the influence of David and Sophia's efforts, the police department is forced to address its racial biases. Officers are now mandated to undergo implicit bias training to ensure that no future incidents of this nature are allowed to escalate. The department's leadership, initially hesitant to change, acknowledges the need for reform, ushering in a new era of accountability. The shift in the community's consciousness is palpable. David and Sophia's courage has created a ripple effect that extends far beyond their family. Their struggle for justice resonates with others who've experienced similar injustices. Local schools, businesses, and community centers start to adopt anti-racism policies, and the neighborhood becomes a stronger, more unified place where every voice is heard. The impact of their fight has prompted many to reconsider their roles in contributing to the fight for equality, resulting in new conversations about racial justice and the importance of standing up to prejudice when it's witnessed. As the community transforms, David and Sophia stand at the forefront of the movement, becoming symbols of resilience and advocacy for change. Their victory has opened doors for more people to demand their rights and speak up when they encounter discrimination. They use their platform to continue advocating for police reform, advocating for policies that will ensure that all individuals are treated with dignity, no matter their background or skin color. The lessons learned from their experience become a driving force for a more equitable society, one where racism has no place, and justice is available to all. In the final scene, David and Sophia are seen walking hand in hand through their neighborhood. Their connection, both as a couple and as partners in the fight for justice, is stronger than ever. They've faced challenges, yes, but their commitment to each other and their cause has only deepened. They know that this is just the beginning of a longer journey, one that will continue to test their resolve, but also one that will offer new opportunities to make a lasting difference. The journey is not over, but they walk with heads held high, ready to face whatever comes next. Their love for each other, combined with their shared sense of justice, propels them forward. This experience has not only strengthened their relationship, but also deepened their understanding of the power of standing up for what's right. The final line encapsulates their journey and the greater fight for equality. They know that true justice doesn't come just from legal victories. It comes from a shared commitment to fairness, kindness, and respect for all people, regardless of their background. Justice isn't just about law enforcement. It's about fairness. And fairness means treating everyone with respect, no matter who they are.